Welcome to Sound Doctrine. Imagine someone hands you a beautifully polished, incredibly expensive leather shoe.
Oh yeah, like top-tier craftsmanship.
Exactly. The craftsmanship is just flawless. You put it on, you tie the laces, and to everyone in the room, you just look like $1,000,000.
You look like you completely put your life together.
Right. You look totally put together. But inside that shoe, hidden where literally no one else can see it, there's this jagged nail driving straight into your heel.
Just brutal.
Yeah, but you smile, you engage in polite conversation, you don't complain to the host of the party, you don't even limp.
Right.
So are you content? According to, the modern definition, you might be.
Because you're keeping the peace.
Exactly, you're keeping the peace. But according to the source material we are diving into today, you aren't experiencing contentment at all. In fact, you are bursting with internal rebellion.
Yeah, and that invisible nail, it really changes the entire diagnostic criteria of our emotional and spiritual health.
It really does.
Because we are so accustomed to judging our well-being by, external metrics, if we act calm, we just assume we are calm.
Right. Fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Exactly. But today's text just totally obliterates that surface-level thinking. We are exploring the first chapter of a manual written by Jeremiah Burroughs, and it's titled The Rare Jewel of Christian Contentment.
Such a great title.
It is. And the context of this text is so vital here. Burroughs wasn't writing this from, a tranquil monastery with a cup of herbal tea.
No, not at all.
He was writing in the middle of the English Civil War. His immediate world consisted of political collapse, violent uprisings, plagues sweeping through cities.
Just profound, terrifying uncertainty everywhere.
Exactly. Total chaos.
Which is exactly why we aren't approaching this as some dusty piece of 17th century history.
Right.
We are reading it as an incredibly convicting, highly practical manual for how to actually navigate our own chaotic lives. When the world is literally on fire around you, how do you find a peace that isn't just a psychological parlor trick?
Yeah, that's the core question. And Burroughs builds his entire argument on a foundation laid by the Apostle Paul in the book of Philippians.
Philippians 4:11, right?
Yes, Philippians 4:11, where Paul writes, "I have learned, in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content."
But the underlying language Paul uses there is really fascinating, and honestly, it's a bit controversial to modern ears.
It is, yeah.
Because it really flirts with the concept of self-sufficiency.
It does. So the Greek word Paul uses is autarkia, which, interestingly enough, was actually a favorite buzzword of the Stoic philosophers of his day.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Stoics used it to describe a man who was essentially an island, someone who had stripped away all his emotional attachments and dependencies.
So literally nothing external could touch him.
Exactly. He was sufficient in himself because he had just lowered his expectations of the world to absolute zero.
Which sounds so depressing, honestly.
It really does. But Burroughs points out that Paul completely hijacks this word and redefines it. Paul isn't claiming to be this emotional fortress.
What?
He is saying he has a sufficiency of satisfaction within his own heart, but it is entirely derived from the grace of Christ dwelling in him.
So it's a derived sufficiency, like he isn't pulling himself up by his own spiritual bootstraps.
Far from it. Burroughs makes it super clear that true, absolute self-sufficiency belongs exclusively to God.
Right.
God alone is the all-sufficient one. So what happens with the believer is this really profound transfer. God freely communicates his fullness to us.
So even if Paul is sitting in, a freezing prison cell, stripped of literally every outward
For
comfort.
friends, no freedom, no warm clothes.
No good food, yeah.
Yeah.
He still has a sufficient portion between Christ and his own soul to abundantly satisfy him.
Exactly. He isn't numb to the cold. He is just thoroughly warmed by an entirely different heat source.
Wow. That sets a staggeringly high bar right out of the gate.
It really does.
We aren't talking about coping mechanisms here. We're talking about an entirely different operating system for the human heart.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. An entirely different operating system.
And that actually brings us to the roadmap for Burroughs' argument. He gives us this central definition of Christian contentment that serves as the anchor for, everything else he writes in this deep dive.
Yeah, this definition is key.
I'm going to read it, and we are going to just dissect it piece by piece for the listener. So here's his definition. Christian contentment is that sweet, inward, quiet, gracious frame of spirit which freely submits to and delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition.
I mean, every single adjective in that sentence is doing heavy lifting.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly dense piece of theology packed into just a single breath.
It is. So let's pull apart that first phrase. A sweet, inward, quiet reality.
Okay, yeah.
Burroughs' core argument here is that contentment is strictly an inward heart thing. Like, it is a work of the Spirit indoors.
Which goes right back to that beautifully polished shoe we talked about at the beginning.
Exactly, because we have built an entire societal infrastructure around external placidity.
Oh, totally. If you don't throw a tantrum in the board meeting, or if you don't scream at the barista who messes up your coffee order,
Then society deems you a well-adjusted, content person.
right, we mistake good manners for spiritual peace.
We really do.
But Burroughs drags us past the exterior, and he points to Psalm 62:1.
Wow.
Now, the common translation reads, "Truly, my soul waiteth upon God."
Okay.
But Burroughs highlights this alternative, arguably more precise translation, which is, "My soul, be thou silent unto God."
Oh, wow. My soul be silent.
Notice the target of the command. It is not my mouth be silent, it is the soul.
That is deeply unsettling,
It is.
because it just removes all our hiding places, you know? It is relatively easy to train your mouth to be quiet. We do it literally all the time.
Oh, every day.
You get passed over for a promotion, and you force a smile, and you congratulate your coworker. Your mouth is silent. But inwardly,
Inwardly, it's a completely different story.
you are drafting a venomous resignation letter in your head. You are replaying the perceived injustice on a loop while you take a shower.
Right. You are mentally tearing down the person who got the job.
Exactly. Your soul is just screaming at the top of its lungs.
And Burroughs actually uses the phrase bursting with discontent. Like, you might be projecting this aura of perfect submission to the outside world, but God is not observing your aura.
He's not looking at the outside.
No, God is listening to the internal monologue. Burroughs makes this terrifying point that our souls have a language, and God hears the peevish, fretful language of our internal world just as clearly as spoken words.
Wow.
Yeah, so when we harbor that internal bitterness, we are communicating rebellion directly to God, even if our lips are perfectly sealed.
I mean, social media has basically turned this into an art form.
Oh, absolutely.
Is the ultimate manifestation of the smooth shoe.
Yeah.
We curate these flawless, aesthetically pleasing grids. You know, look at my perfectly behaved children.
My serene vacation, my beautiful sourdough starter.
Yes. Outwardly, it's a portrait of absolute tranquility. But behind the screen, the reality is so often crushing anxiety or comparison, debt, relational fracture.
The shoe is violently pinching the flesh.
But we refuse to limp because the performance of peace has become more important to us than the actual possession of it.
And that performance is just exhausting.
It is so exhausting.
Maintaining the facade while the internal reality is collapsing, it requires a massive amount of psychological energy.
Right.
And Burroughs is offering an escape from that exhaustion. He is saying that true contentment is an inward, quiet, a literal silence of the soul that eliminates the cognitive dissonance between how you look and how you actually feel.
You actually have to deal with the pinching flex.
Exactly. You have to deal with it.
But this brings up a massive friction point for me, and I know it does for a lot of listeners too.
Sure.
Because when I hear 17th century theologians telling me to have a quiet heart and an inward silence, my 21st century brain immediately raises a red flag.
What kind of red flag?
I start thinking, wait, does this just mean I am supposed to be a passive victim? If my workplace is totally toxic, or my health is failing, or I'm facing deep injustice, am I just supposed to sit there quietly and let the building burn down around me in the name of contentment?
Yeah, that's a very fair question.
It sounds like a recipe for becoming a complete doormat to the universe.
That is definitely the most common and frankly the most valid objection to this kind of theology. It sounds like Marx's famous critique, right? That religion is just the opiate of the masses.
Right, like a drug designed to make you docile in the face of suffering.
Exactly. But Burroughs anticipates this exact pushback. He absolutely refuses to let contentment devolve into apathy.
Okay.
So he defines very explicitly what this quietness of heart is not opposed to, which I think completely reshapes how we understand it.
Let's walk through those nuances because they are so crucial for the listener. First, he says contentment is not opposed to a due sense of affliction.
Meaning, you are not required to gaslight yourself into pretending a tragedy is actually a blessing in disguise. Burroughs points to Jesus in Luke 9:23, where he commands us to take up our cross daily.
Luke 9:23.
Yeah. And the entire point of a cross is that it is an instrument of torture and execution.
It is heavy, it's splintered, it's agonizing.
Exactly. Jesus does not tell us to pretend the cross is a feather pillow. God grants his people the space to be acutely aware of their suffering. It is not a sin to feel the crushing weight of the wood on your back.
That is incredibly liberating. You don't have to practice toxic positivity.
No, not at all.
You don't have to smile through a cancer diagnosis and pretend you aren't terrified.
Exactly. True contentment does not require emotional anesthesia. You see this perfectly modeled in the Garden of Gethsemane.
Oh, yeah.
Jesus is sweating drops of blood, begging for the cup of suffering to pass from him. He has a profound, visceral sense of the affliction.
Yet he is perfectly content.
Right, which leads right into Burroughs' second caveat. Contentment is not opposed to making what he calls an orderly moan to God or to our friends.
An orderly moan. The phrasing there is just brilliant, isn't it?
It implies a structured, intentional bringing of our grief into the light. Like, this is the entire function of the Psalms of Lament.
Exactly. It is sitting across from a trusted friend saying, I am shattered right now, I am bleeding out.
Right. It is relational, it is honest, but it is not destructive.
Exactly. It doesn't lash out violently at God or others. It brings the pain into the bounds of holy communication.
And then the third caveat completely dismantles that passive victim fear we talked about. Burroughs says contentment is not opposed to lawfully seeking help or deliverance through earnest prayer and action.
Yeah, God is mercifully indulgent to our physical and emotional realities. He does not take it ill if we use lawful means to escape our afflictions.
So if your house is on fire, you don't sit in the living room practicing inward silence.
Right, you grab a fire extinguisher and call the fire department.
Exactly.
If you are sick, you aggressively seek medical treatment. If you are in a financially precarious situation, you actively look for a better job. You pray importunately, relentlessly for deliverance. Action is not the enemy of contentment. Okay, but there has to be a boundary line there, right?
What do you mean?
Well, if I can cry, and I can complain to my community, and I can actively fight to change my circumstances, how does that look any different from just regular old anxiety?
Yeah.
Where's the line between actively seeking help and losing my Christian contentment?
That's a great distinction to make. The dividing line is submission in the seeking.
Submission in the seeking.
Yes. You utilize every lawful means to change your situation, but you do it with a deeply held caveat, which is, I want to be delivered when God wills, as God wills, and how God wills.
You hold the desired outcome with an open hand.
Exactly. That holy resignation is literally the only thing that keeps active problem solving from mutating into frantic, anxious striving.
So if that is what contentment allows, what does a quiet heart actually oppose?
Well, Burroughs lists several highly destructive internal states that contentment fiercely opposes. First, he says it opposes murmuring and a repining. Yeah, this isn't loud rebellion. It's that constant, low-grade grumbling against God. It's the Israelites wandering in the wilderness, perpetually dissatisfied, always finding a reason why God's provision isn't quite good enough.
Man, it's the baseline hum of modern cynicism.
Oh, entirely.
We just expect things to be annoying, and we narrate our lives through a lens of minor grievances.
And that murmuring easily escalates into what Burroughs calls vexing and fretting.
Fretting.
Yeah, fretting is a fascinating psychological state. It is a degree beyond murmuring. It is an unsettled, unstable spirit that completely paralyzes your present usefulness.
Let's park on that word, tumultuousness of spirit. Burroughs references Acts 19:36, which says, ye ought to be quiet and to do nothing rashly.
Acts 19:36, right.
What does tumultuousness actually look like in practice, like day to day?
Tumultuousness is when your internal world becomes an unruly mob. Your thoughts run distractingly, and they work in this confused, chaotic manner. It is the literal definition of panic.
Okay, wow.
When you are in a tumultuous state, your executive function just shuts down.
You can't think logically.
You can't think logically, you can't pray clearly, and you certainly can't perform your daily duties with any kind of grace. Your emotions stage a coup against your reason and your faith.
To illustrate the sheer agony of this state, Burroughs uses an analogy that hit me incredibly hard.
The twins.
Yes. He describes these as distracting, heart-consuming cares, and he points to Genesis 25:22.
Genesis 25:22.
This is the story of Rebekah, pregnant with twins, Jacob and Esau. And the text says the children literally struggled together within her, like they were violently dividing her from the inside out.
It is a staggering psychological observation. Burroughs is saying that when a Christian allows the fear of evil tidings, bad news, impending disaster, financial ruin to fully take hold, it creates a literal internal civil war.
It's not just a passing worry.
No, it creates a struggle inside the womb of the soul that threatens to tear the person apart.
And we have all felt the somatic reality of that.
Oh, absolutely.
You get a terrifying call from a doctor, or you realize a major investment has just collapsed. It physically feels like there are two massive opposing forces wrestling inside your gut.
Yes.
Faith is desperately trying to maintain altitude, and pure primal panic is trying to rip the controls away. Your cortisol spikes, your chest tightens, and you are just consumed by this internal division. It is utterly exhausting.
And that exhaustion is exactly why the quiet of the heart is so vital. Contentment acts as the peace treaty that stops the twins from fighting.
A peace treaty. I love that.
Yeah, contentment looks at the terrifying medical report and says, we will feel the weight of this affliction. We will weep. We will seek the best oncologists in the world. We will pray fiercely for healing, but we will not allow our internal world to become a riot.
We will not let fear divide the soul.
Exactly.
I mean, that sounds like a superpower, but how do we actually acquire it?
Yeah.
That takes us to the next phrase in Burroughs' definition. Contentment is a gracious frame of spirit.
A gracious frame.
Yeah, and this is where he draws a very sharp, very uncomfortable line in the sand regarding where this peace actually comes from. Because it is incredibly easy to mistake a naturally chill personality for profound spiritual maturity.
Oh, we do this constantly in church culture and in our social circles.
Constantly.
We all know people who are just genetically predisposed to be unbothered. Burroughs calls this having a quiet constitution.
A quiet constitution.
They just don't have high blood pressure about anything. Their car gets totaled and they just shrug and say, well, it's just a car.
And we look at them and think, wow, what a spiritual giant. Look at their deep, abiding faith.
Exactly. Meanwhile, the person with a highly sensitive, deeply passionate temperament is wrestling with God, crying out in prayer, and struggling to find peace, and we view them as spiritually inferior.
It's so backwards.
It is. But Burroughs argues that a gracious frame of spirit is an entirely different species from a naturally stoic temperament. To explain the mechanics of this, he uses the brilliant analogy of warming clothes by a fire.
I really love this metaphor because it maps so perfectly onto modern life.
It really does.
Imagine it is a freezing, bitter winter day. You are shivering. Someone brings you a great external gift to cheer you up. Maybe it's a bonus at work, or a new relationship, or even just a distraction like a really good movie.
Right, something to take your mind off the cold.
Yeah, and it quiets you down. For a moment, you seem content. But Burroughs says that kind of contentment is like warming your clothes by standing next to a blazing fireplace. The heat is entirely external. The absolute second you step away from the fire and walk back out into the cold, your clothes turn to ice again.
Because the warmth is entirely dependent on proximity to favorable circumstances, you have no internal heat source.
This is how we live.
Yeah, it is.
We just run from one external fire to the next. We feel the anxiety creeping in, so we buy something online. Fire.
Right.
We feel depressed about our living situation, so we scroll through social media for an hour. Fire. We get stressed about our career, so we pour a drink. Fire.
But the cold always comes back the second the external stimulus is removed.
Always.
Burroughs contrasts this with spiritual contentment, which he likens to the warmth a man's clothes have from the natural metabolic heat of his own body.
It radiates from the inside out.
Exactly. It is a grace that permeates the entire soul. You can throw a spiritually content person into the freezing tundra of suffering, and while they will definitely feel the cold, their internal temperature remains stable because the heat source is the grace of Christ within them, not the circumstances around them.
But practically speaking, how can I diagnose myself? How do I know if I'm just standing next to a good fire or if I'm just a naturally apathetic person versus actually possessing this internal furnace of grace?
Burroughs provides a razor-sharp, almost painful diagnostic test for this.
Oh, boy.
He says, watch how a person reacts when God's name or God's truth is dishonored, and compare that to how they react to their own personal losses.
Oh, that cuts deep.
It does. A naturally quiet, stoic person is equally unbothered by everything. If they lose $10,000 in the stock market, they shrug.
Right.
If they see profound injustice, or if God's truth is mocked and dragged through the mud, they also shrug. They just don't have the capacity to care deeply. Their peace is actually just numbness.
It's just apathy.
Exactly. But a gracious heart, a truly contented Christian, will be incredibly quiet, patient, and submissive when it comes to their own personal suffering. But their spirit will rise up fiercely and be highly active when God's glory is at stake.
That reframes everything for me. The Stoic is just flatlining. But the contented Christian is intensely alive.
Yes.
They're passionately active for justice and for God's glory, while simultaneously maintaining a profound peace regarding their own personal discomforts. It's not apathy. It is correctly ordered passion.
That's a great phrase. Correctly ordered passion. Burroughs says that contentment, which springs from grace, is very quick and lively in the service of God. If your peace makes you lazy, unfeeling, and indifferent to the suffering of others or the honor of God, it isn't Christian contentment. It's just natural sluggishness.
I really want the listener to sit with that diagnostic for a second. Think about the last time you faced a significant personal slight or a financial hit. Were you unbothered simply because you couldn't muster the energy to care?
Right.
And conversely, when you see things that break God's heart, do you feel any rising passion to act? The difference between a stoic flatline and a lively, gracious spirit might look similar from a distance, but internally, they are universes apart.
They really are. So if we recognize that this warmth must be generated internally by grace, the inevitable next question is about the mechanics of the will.
How do we engage our volition in this process?
Exactly. Which brings us to the next critical phrase in Burroughs' definition. Contentment is a spirit which freely submits.
The word freely is the linchpin here, because so much of what we call patience is actually just a hostage situation.
Yes. Burroughs calls it patience by force.
Patience by force.
He illustrates this with the analogy of a paralyzed man.
Okay, unpack that.
So if a man has lost all feeling in his limbs, and you walk up and pinch his arm as hard as you can, he won't react.
Because he can't feel it.
Right. But you wouldn't look at that lack of reaction and say, wow, what incredible, virtuous patience.
No, of course not.
His lack of reaction isn't a moral victory. It is simply nerve damage. Burroughs calls this mere stupidity, which in 17th century parlance meant a lack of sensory awareness or a dullness of mind.
So true freedom and submission means you are acutely aware of the pain. The nerves are fully functional.
Exactly.
You feel the pinch. You understand the injustice of the pinch. You calculate exactly what this trial is costing you emotionally and physically. And yet, in the full light of that awareness, you actively and freely yield to God.
It is a muscular executive choice.
Let's dive deeper into patience by force, because I feel like it's the default coping mechanism of our era.
Oh, absolutely.
How often do we comfort ourselves or our friends with variations of fatalism? Well, it is what it is.
Right. You just have to accept it. There's nothing you can do.
Or, God is sovereign, so you just must be content.
And Burroughs absolutely despises that framework. He says the phrase must be content is far too low an expression for a Christian.
Too low an expression. Because it reduces God to a cosmic bully and the Christian to a defeated prisoner of war.
Exactly. If you only submit because you realize God's arm is stronger than yours and you can't wrestle him out of the trial, that isn't contentment. It's just a pragmatic calculation of power dynamics.
It makes me think of signing an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement, when you get fired from a job you hate.
Oh, that's a perfect modern equivalent.
Right. You take the severance package, you sign the document, and you are legally bound to be silent. Outwardly, you aren't complaining. You have submitted to the reality of the situation.
But internally?
Internally, you despise the company. You hope they go bankrupt. Your silence is entirely forced by external constraints. Burroughs is saying, do not treat your relationship with God's providence like a cosmic NDA.
The shift has to be from, I must be content because I am trapped, to readily and freely, I will be content.
Must to will.
Yeah, the transition from must to will changes the entire posture of the soul. It moves from fatalistic resignation to loving alignment. But to get there, we have to look at the etymology of the word submit, which Burroughs breaks down beautifully.
How does he define it?
It literally means to send under.
To send under. That phrase completely changed my understanding of this entire concept.
How so?
Because in our modern context, submission is a dirty word. It implies weakness, defeat, and a loss of autonomy. We are taught to rise up, to assert our truth, to take control.
Right. Culturally, it's the exact opposite of what we're told to do.
Exactly. When a severe trial hits, the natural biological instinct of the human heart is to rise above it. We want to be the ones calling the shots. We inherently believe that our will, our comfort, and our timeline should be regarded more highly than God's.
So when that internal rebellion begins, when the twins start wrestling in the womb and the soul wants to rise up and usurp God's authority, what does the contented Christian do?
They don't just passively wait for the feeling of peace to wash over them.
No, they exercise profound spiritual agency. They speak directly to their own unruly will and they command it. Get you under, O soul. Keep under the authority of God, the power that God has over you.
Get you under, O soul. It's an act of spiritual self-mastery.
Yes.
You have to be the commanding officer of your own internal world. You take your rebellious thoughts, your frantic timeline, your demands for an explanation, and you actively, deliberately send them under the umbrella of God's sovereignty.
And paradoxically, that active, willing subjugation of the self is the most liberating thing a human being can do.
Because you aren't being crushed into submission by an external force.
Exactly. You are bowing the knee from the inside out. You are aligning yourself with the only force in the universe that actually knows what it is doing.
But Burroughs doesn't stop there, which honestly feels almost cruel because submitting is hard enough.
He takes it a step further.
He pushes it to a level that strains modern credulity. The final part of his definition says that the contented spirit doesn't just freely submit, but it actually delights in God's wise and fatherly disposal in every condition.
This is where we cross the Rubicon from merely surviving a trial to finding actual transformative grace within it.
Delighting in it.
Burroughs argues that submission is necessary, but taking pleasure in God's disposal is the ultimate goal. He calls it finding honey in the rock.
Okay, I have to push back on this because there is a danger here.
Sure, let's hear it.
Calling a terrible, painful thing good, saying that a car crash, a miscarriage, or a chronic illness is something to delight in, sounds incredibly toxic.
It does sound that way, yeah.
It sounds like psychological self-harm. How can Burroughs possibly demand that we find pleasure in devastation?
It's a vital distinction he makes. He doesn't demand we find pleasure in the devastation itself. He demands we find pleasure in the disposal of it by a wise God. The disposal of it.
Yes, he makes a very careful distinction. A person who is merely enduring a trial might grit their teeth and say, God is just. I deserve worse. This is fair.
Which acknowledges God's sovereignty and his justice.
Right. But Burroughs points to Psalm 119:71, where David writes, "It is good for me that I have been afflicted."
Psalm 119:71, saying, the hand of God is good when that hand is currently holding a rod that is striking your back. That requires a completely different paradigm of who God is.
Exactly. It requires shifting from viewing God as an impersonal force to viewing him as exercising a wise and fatherly disposal.
Fatherly disposal.
When we only submit to God's sovereignty, we acknowledge his power. But when we take pleasure in his disposal, we are acknowledging his infinite wisdom and his paternal love.
I see.
The contented heart realizes, I only have a finite, tiny sliver of visibility into my timeline. God sees eternity. God knows that if I had not endured this specific affliction at this specific time, my pride, my greed, or my self-reliance would have spiritually destroyed me. Wow. It's the realization that the surgeon's scalpel is cutting away a tumor, not just inflicting random pain.
That's a perfect analogy.
You don't delight in the pain of the incision. You delight in the wisdom of the surgeon who is saving your life.
And that brings us to the most difficult phrase in the entire chapter, the two words that close out his definition. In every condition.
In every condition.
Oh.
The deceitfulness of the human heart on this point is just staggering.
It really is.
We are masters at playing this internal game where we convince ourselves that we would be absolute paragons of Christian contentment if only we were facing any other trial than the one we are currently in.
Burroughs calls us out with surgical precision on this. He observes how we try to bargain with providence. If God strikes our health, we lay in bed and think, if it were only my money that I lost, I could be perfectly content.
Right. I could live in poverty with joy as long as I had my health.
Exactly.
If God strikes our bank account, we say, if only it were my health. I could endure physical illness with such grace as long as I knew my family was financially secure.
We always, without fail, believe that a different cross would be lighter, more manageable, and better suited to our unique spiritual gifts than the one currently crushing our shoulders.
Which culminates in perhaps the most memorable, piercing quote of the entire book.
The carving knife?
Yes. Burroughs drops the hammer and says, we must not be our own carvers.
We must not be our own carvers.
I want to pause and just let the weight of that analogy sink in for a second. We approach the buffet of life, And we want to take the carving knife out of God's hands. We want to look at the meat and say, I'll take the tenderloin of financial blessing, a small side of manageable relational conflict, just to build some character.
But absolutely none of the gristle of chronic illness.
Exactly.
Burroughs categorizes the 3 distinct ways we constantly try to carve our own portions.
That's the first one.
First, as we just discussed, we try to carve the kind of affliction. We want to choose the category of our suffering. We want to dictate whether our trials are physical, financial, relational, or reputational.
Right. If you are a highly private person, you might say, I can handle physical pain, but please don't let my reputation be publicly slandered.
We want to curate our suffering to match our natural strengths.
And second, he says, we try to carve the time or continuance of the affliction.
This is where even the most devout believers stumble. Someone might say, I have submitted. I have not murmured. I have borne this trial for 3 months or a year or 5 years. Surely my patience has proven itself.
The timer should go off now.
Right. We want to be the sovereign disposers of the timeline of our deliverance. We think we know exactly when a trial has accomplished its purpose.
And the third way we carve is perhaps the most overwhelming. We try to carve the variety of our condition.
Yeah, variety, yeah.
This addresses the snowball effect of suffering. It's the story of Job. You lose your job, you think, okay, I can handle this. But the very next day, your car engine blows up.
And the week after that, you get a terrifying medical diagnosis.
Right. And the human breaking point is usually right there. We say, Lord, I can handle the job loss. I was content. But I cannot handle the variety of these afflictions hitting all at once. It is unreasonable. It is unfair.
It is so deeply convicting to realize the sheer arrogance behind my desire to be my own carver.
Arrogance is the word for it.
When I want to dictate the kind, the length, and the variety of my suffering, I am implicitly telling God that my localized, finite, emotionally compromised perspective is actually superior to his omniscient, eternal wisdom.
You're telling him that he doesn't know what he's doing.
Exactly. To drop the carving knife requires a radical, terrifying, and ultimately beautiful trust in that wise and fatherly disposal.
Yes.
It requires looking at the plate you've been handed, no matter how unpalatable it seems, and believing that a father who, as Burroughs says, sees a great while from now, has portioned it out with exact, loving precision to form you into the image of Christ.
That framing completely neutralizes the bursting discontent we talked about at the beginning. When your soul truly believes it is being curated by a loving father, rather than being battered by random cosmic chaos, it can finally obey the command to be silent.
Right. It can stop drafting the angry emails.
It can stop panicking about the future. It can just rest.
It is the ultimate diagnostic shift. The X-ray doesn't just show a broken bone anymore. It shows the hands of the physician setting the bone so it can heal stronger than before.
That's a beautiful way to put it. As we wrap up this deep dive into the source material, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final, highly provocative thought drawn from the closing paragraphs of Burroughs' first chapter.
It's a sobering ending.
It really is. He points out a harsh, unavoidable reality of living in a fallen, fractured world. Afflictions very rarely come in isolation. The variety we just talked about is the norm, not the exception.
And he grounds this in the terrifying reality of his own day.
Right, the English Civil War.
He describes people who would be forced to flee their homes, leaving everything behind, simply to escape violent plunderers during the war.
Just horrific.
And then, having barely escaped with their lives, they would arrive in a new city only to immediately fall desperately sick with the plague.
It is unimaginable trauma. Escaping one nightmare only to walk directly into a worse one.
But here is the ultimate challenge Burroughs leaves for us, the acid test of whether we possess this rare jewel.
What's that test?
If you were systematically stripped of one comfort after another, if your wealth evaporated, if your health failed, if your reputation was ruined, if your community abandoned you, if the layers of your external warmth were peeled away one by one, would outside observers look at you and see a change?
Would they say, did you see what a sweet, gracious, and holy temper they were in when they had everything? Look at them now, shivering in the cold. They're in that exact same sweet temper still.
That is the true test. Does your warmth come from the fire of your circumstances, or does it radiate from the grace within?
Let that question sit heavy with you as you go about your day. Take a hard look at your life. Where are you wearing a smooth shoe to hide a violently pinched and restless spirit? Where do you need to exercise your will, command your soul to be silent, and finally put down the carving knife?
It's a lot to process.
It is, but it's exactly what we need. Thank you for joining this deep dive into the source material. We will see you next time.